Okay, so our next speaker is Souhayl Maronesy. He'll be talking about algorithmic theology. Yeah? All right, thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد الذي فاق في الفضل العرب والعجم دون كتابة ولا قلم. So first of all, I would like to say it is an honor to be here with you. This is my first time in the UK, and it is, I believe it is one of the most blessed reasons to be in the UK, to participate in a noble cause as this conference. So first of all, I want to preface this by saying that algorithmic theology is not something new. It's not an innovation, it's not a new idea, it's a continuation of a tradition. It's not a random idea, right? It is using reason to prove the existence of God. It is using reason to prove the existence of God. And this is something that it is the tradition of the prophets and all theologians. They use the science of their time to prove the existence of God. In this case, by reason, I mean computer reasoning, computer logic, right? So we are simply following the traditions of the prophets, salawatullahi alayhim, and the tradition of theologians who always take the sciences, the dominant sciences of their time, and use that to prove the existence of God, such as what Imam al-Ghazali did with the science of logic, Aristotelian logic. So with that said, briefly, I want to go over the agenda. First, we will talk about the background behind algorithmic theology. Where did the idea come from? Then we will talk about the 10 principles, al-mabādiʿ, al-ʿasharah, as we call them, of algorithmic theology. We'll skip 2 of them, which are not that important. And then we'll talk about the genealogy of algorithmic theology. I'm going to have a lot of trouble saying that word today. Algorithmic theology. Both the epistemological genealogy and also the scholarly genealogy of the science, of the discipline. So this is a new discipline that we're proposing. And then we'll talk about an example, which I call the kalima argument. It's basically the articulation of the cosmological argument, but it's the Quranic articulation, which we will talk about, inshallah. Basically, we'll apply that to algorithms and AI. And then finally, we'll talk about, I'll share some final thoughts. So the background, where did the idea come from? So more than 5 years ago, I can't pinpoint exactly what year. I think it has happened to all of us where we read a verse from the Quran and we have a lot of questions about it. We may understand the literal meaning, but we have questions about why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala phrased it in that manner. And then all of a sudden, Allah Azza wa Jal puts something in front of us in the physical world that makes that verse manifest itself, manifest its meanings in ways that basically give you goosebumps, right? So I think for me, the idea behind algorithmic theology began with an experience like that, which gave me a paradigm shift when it came to the way I thought about technology. So the verse that I started pondering upon is actually one of the 5 verses that were revealed at the very beginning to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that verse is allama bil kalām. So at first glance, that verse allama bil kalām, and most tafsirs say this as well, it's independent. Allah Azza wa Jal taught through the pen. Allah Azza wa Jal taught through the pen. So the question becomes, who did he taught? So what are the 2 objects of what Allah Azza wa Jal taught, right? Or who and what did Allah Azza wa Jal taught, right? So I always wondered why that is, and why is the following verse, put in that position that it has been put. And I think it'll make it clear as to what I mean when I give you this example. And then I was watching a TED Talk where this lady was talking about Mach 20 aircrafts, hypersonic aircrafts. And these are aircrafts that can fly from Los Angeles, theoretically, from Los Angeles to Long Beach, or from New York to Long Beach in 11 minutes and 20 seconds. And she was saying that the first time they tried to fly this aircraft, it immediately went out of control. It was so fast, they could not maneuver it. However, from this experience, they collected enough data, they recorded and they wrote down enough data that allowed them to fly the aircraft for 3 minutes the second time. So Allah Azza wa Jal taught them through recording that which they did not know. So basically that's when the second verse came in, and I saw the connection between the first verse and the second verse, where through the act of recording, through the act of data, right? We live in the age of data science. Through the act of data and recording, Allah Azza wa Jal teaches the human being, and Allah Azza wa Jal does not say allama al-mu'mina, right? Ma lam ya'lam. He says allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam. Through the act of writing and recording, Allah Azza wa Jal taught the human being that which he did not know, to fly the plane or the aircraft for 3 minutes when it wasn't possible the first time. So the paradigm shift came where I connected modern technology to the all-powerful creating hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the eternal, the azali attribute of knowledge. So this was Allah Azza wa Jal teaching them, right? This was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching them. So the idea that technology is secular just disappeared all of a sudden, having studied in the West and never thinking technology can be used in such a way, or thought of in such a way, where you see Allah Azza wa Jal in the technology and his power. So that gave me a paradigm shift where after this, I started seeing everything that I was doing as a, in computer science as a software engineer. I saw patterns related to the might and to the basically to the Quran, to the Hadith. It basically, my mindset changed completely. And then there was the second event that took place was I was asked a question by a Lyft driver. I was about to go give a sermon at a masjid, and I told the Lyft driver that that's what I'm doing. And he said, I don't believe in God, I'm praying. I mean, how can you say that God has a plan and then that's decree and doesn't change, and then pray for Allah Azza wa Jal to change that decree? So there's a contradiction here. It's a contradiction between free will and a decree as well. So the same concept. So I went back and I was at the time preparing for a lot of coding interviews. So the idea of data structures and coding questions was fresh in my mind. So actually I wrote a whole article on how there's no contradiction between free will and the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using data structures, right? And then after this experience, I was preparing for a Google interview, and I was going through recursive algorithms and Fibonacci algorithms, and the idea of algorithmic theology came to me. And this was the last stage where the idea came. And inshallah, I'll explain what I did with that later. So what are the 10 principles of algorithmic theology? Before I talk about that, I want to talk about the epistemological and ontological significance of algorithmic theology. As many of you may have read al-ʿaqā'id of Imam al-Nasafi, he talks about the sources of knowledge, right? The senses, al-khabar al-sadiq and al-aql. So with algorithmic theology, we're actually adding another source of knowledge, what I think all of us would agree, a big source of knowledge today is the computer, right? So we have added the computer to the three sources of knowledge that we have been taught traditionally, right? The second basically implication is when it comes to the 5 or the 4 levels of existence of Imam al-Ghazali, right? He talks about 4 levels of existence. He talks about existence in reality, existence in the mind, existence on the tongue, and existence in writing or drawing, right? So now with computer, we have another type of existence. We have what we call, virtual existence, right? Or what we can call a digital or binary existence, right? So keeping these two in mind, I think now we have many, these two ideas in mind, now we have many doors open for us, right? Both from the perspective of epistemology and ontology. And then the second thing I want to do is define algorithms, because I'm going to use 2 different meanings of algorithms in this talk. The first one is the linguistic one, a step-by-step rule-governed process used to derive conclusions from premises, right? Formal logic, the arguments in formal logic could be considered algorithms, right? And then if we do that on a computer with numbers, then it becomes a computer algorithm. So the majority of the times that I will refer to algorithms today is me referring to computer algorithms, with the exceptions of a few statements that I'll make. So there are 10 principles. The first one is definition. What is the definition of the science? There are multiple ways, or 2 ways we can define the science, because it is an interdisciplinary science. It combines computer science and kalām, or theology, or al-mabādiʿ, whatever you want to call it, right? So one way we can define it is by saying it is a discipline that explores the computer algorithms and data structures that are able to prove theological arguments, right? And then the second way we can define it is by saying knowing the creed of Muslims, or knowing the creed in general, because non-Muslims can use this as well, knowing creed from its algorithmic proofs, right? And this is taken from al-ʿasharah al-aqad, the example or the definition that Imam At-Taftazani mentions. He says this is the definition of the Qudama. He says, "Ma'rifatul aqaidi an adillatiha." Right. So the only difference here is that we have set algorithmic proofs instead of just proofs. Right. The second is topics. What are the topics of the science? Again, because it is an interdisciplinary science, the topics could either be computer science, algorithms, and data structures. This is the catch, from the perspective of their ability to prove theological principles, right? We have to confine it, because data structures and algorithms can be studied from many different perspectives. So from that perspective, that is the top. It becomes a topic of algorithmic theology, and then we can also say the subjects are theological proofs. Again, from the perspective of their provability by computer algorithms and data structures. Benefits. I mentioned the benefit at the very beginning. We are taking the prophetic approach and the scholarly approach to prove the existence of God using the science of the time. Merit. It is amongst the elevated sciences. It unites the noble aim of Tawheed and modern scientific tools. Its relation, what is its relation to other science, or what is its relation to other sciences? Yeah. So I think we can say that because it is an interdisciplinary science, it is both an instrumental science, al-mabādiʿ, and also an objective science, al-mabādiʿ. Right, and this is traditionally not the way sciences are in the Islamic tradition. You either have it's either al-mabādiʿ or al-mabādiʿ. However, I believe the time needs this integration at the very beginning. The times that we live in requires this type of integration, and then once it normalizes and it becomes normal for us to use computer algorithms and data structures to prove the existence of God, then we can separate them. However, for the beginning, I think it's important, as was the case of many sciences. Initially, they were one, and then they were separated, such as the science of Nahu and Sarf, morphology and grammar. the maxims, and the maxims are a very important part of the science. One of the maxims, and this will become clear in a bit. One of the maxims of the science is binary Boolean representability of the arguments, algorithmic provability, which is tied to the first one, and then the utility of uncomputability. The utility of uncomputability. What is the ruling? I wouldn't dare to say it's fard, right? Basically, I would say it's mustahab at this point, unless the scholars, if it becomes a proven science, the scholars can give it fard kifaya, for example. But at this point, I wouldn't give it anything other than being mustahab. So what is the genealogy? Before I show you the next slide, I think I want to preface it by an event that took place, which influenced al-Farabi very much, so that you don't think I'm making the next slide up. So at the time of al-Farabi, a very big and famous debate took place between Abu Sa'id al-Sirafi, the grammarian, and Matta ibn Yunus, the logician. So basically, the logician was advocating for mantiq and was trying to spread mantiq throughout the Islamic world. And there was a bit of pushback, as we all know. And so this debate took place between Abu Sa'id and Abu Bishr, who is the Matta, and at the court of one of the Abbasid Wazirs. They told Matta, tell us, or Abu Sirafi told Matta, tell us what is mantiq, because we cannot argue with you unless we know what you mean by mantiq, by logic. He explained to them what logic is, and I'm paraphrasing, the answer of Abu Sa'id al-Sirafi was basically everything that you can do with logic is doable with grammar. Everything that you can do with logic is doable with grammar. And he told them, what you are calling us towards is not a new science, you're calling us towards the language of the Greeks. Right? So that the relationship between language, lugha, and mantiq. So that this prompted al-Farabi to come up with his own ideas about the relationship between grammar and logic, or lugha in general and logic, in his book al-Huruf. Very profound arguments. And I believe this is the first such argument that I know of in history, the profound relationship between the two. And obviously, there have been hints and discussions about it, but to such a level where, and to the degree that Farabi talked about it, I am not aware of. You may correct me if that is wrong. So what is the epistemological genealogy of algorithmic theology? Obviously, as Muslims, we believe language came from God, right? And reason also came from God. So, and the relationship between language and reason, it's basically they're parallel. They're in parallel in many ways. So it came from God, and then we have language and reason, and then you put those two together. You come up with grammar, morphology, and rhetoric. And then after grammar came syllogistic logic. And basically Aristotle is very famous for this. And then after that, Bull came up with Boolean logic. And then we also have symbolic logic. And Boolean logic became was utilized in binary machine readable code. And symbolic logic is used in programming languages, right? And then you add that to hardware semiconductors, computers are born. Computers are born. But what happened here, that Dr. Abu Madian mentions in his latest article, I recommend you guys reading it. The rationalist project started sidelining God from the picture. Well, up to syllogistic logic, we Muslims were using reason and logic and the latest sciences of the time to prove the existence of God, right? But then a shift happened, for many different factors. The West became much more advanced, and they took upon the responsibility of advancing the rational project. However, slowly they sidelined God from the project, to the point where God was not basically the logic of computers, which came from God, essentially, as I mentioned, was no longer being mainly used to prove the existence of God, right? It was used for secular and material reasons. Now, do we claim, or do I claim, that the mind is exactly, or a computer is exactly an intellect? Can it mimic exactly what the intellect can do? Obviously, I take the position that it cannot. Computers can only mimic certain aspects of the human intellect. This is both from a Quranic perspective and a logical perspective. There are many arguments against it by John Lucas, Rogers Penrose, Searle, and perhaps we can talk about some of them later. Now, I want to mention this because it's the basis behind our first maxim. It is the basis behind our first and second maxim, algorithmic provability. Basically, the Church and Turing thesis is one that says, and basically this is the foundation of computers. Basically, the one that says it any function on the natural numbers that can be computed by an effective or algorithmic method. By algorithmic meaning, we mean the linguistic meaning here, is computable by a Turing machine and vice versa, right? So they're saying anything that you can solve using pen and paper, using your intellect, their machine can solve it. It wasn't a real machine, but that's what they're saying. And it became basically the model that they came up with became the foundation of computers that we have today. And now, what do we say? What do we claim? We say that any theological problem that can be formalized algorithmically and be solved, proved algorithmically, in principle, can be addressed using computers, or can be solved, proved using computers, either by derivation from accepted axioms or by revealing its uncomputability. In the latter case, uncomputability discloses essential features of the problem, such as its impossibility. So we also introduce, we have ahkam hukum aqli. We will introduce hukum hasubi, right? What is impossible, what is possible, and what is necessary. And that is something that we still need to work on, but just wanted to introduce the idea. So we take that one step further. Not only mathematical proofs or arithmetic proofs can be addressed using computers. We also know that using automatic theorem provers and proof assistants, you're no longer limited only to mathematical theorems. You can also prove formal logic theorems that are represented in formal logic. For example, Benzmuller used ATPs to prove the ontological argument of Gödel. So that's actually one of the few instances that I know of. I think this was 5 years ago, that a computer was actually used to prove an argument for the existence of God, right? So again, there is precedence, and people see value in this. However, it has not been it has not been become a system or a discipline. It has not become systematic where everyone can look at it and learn from it and build upon it. And I believe algorithmic theology, this new discipline, and the name doesn't really matter, but this new discipline can be a foundation for a lot to be built on it. And actually, the logic theorist was the first ATP, and it proved 38 of the first 52 theorems in Whitehead and Russell's Principia Mathematica. And it actually came up with some new proofs for some of them. which were much shorter, right? So there's a lot, but they use symbolic logic and inshallah symbolic AI, and inshallah we'll talk about how modern AI can be utilized as well. So what is the scholarly genealogy? How long do I have, Dr. Ahmed? 5 minutes. So the scholarly genealogy, we have, obviously we argue that Allah Azza wa Jal, He is the first being who logically argued his existence. And we know that the kalām of Allah Azza wa Jal is qadim, so He precedes any other argument that is made for His existence. And that argument is ingrained in La ilaha illallah. In La ilaha illallah. It's actually a logical argument, and He expands, Allah Azza wa Jal, the argument is that He expands upon it in the verse in which He says, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. And inshallah we'll talk about this. And then we have the Greeks. The Greeks are famous for rationally proving the existence of, the unmoved mover, the one. They had many names for the first cause. And then we have the Muslims, Mu'tazilas, the Mutakallimun, the philosophers. They all contributed a lot to logically proving the existence of God. And then the Europeans from the medieval period onwards, they were very active in this as well. They came up with the ontological argument, and they also built upon the cosmological arguments of the Muslims. So, but the challenge was that the Muslims did not develop their arguments any further, and they did not take advantage of, even though it's just happened in the last century, but we haven't been taking advantage of logic in computers, which is a representation of logic in our intellects to prove the existence of God. But the computer can do a much better job than our minds, because it has more capacity, it's faster, not because it's intrinsically better, right? So what is the kalima argument? La ilaha illallah. So what we learn from there's no God but Allah is the fact that we need to negate all other possibilities to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So Allah Azza wa Jalla is actually pointing us towards what we call as-sabr wa taqsim, disjunctive syllogism. And that becomes even more evident in أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Were they created from nothing, or are they themselves the creators, right? So here, if you talk about the beginning of the universe, there are multiple possibilities. You have a necessary first cause. The universe, it's something of the genus of the universe created itself. Or the genus of this universe created itself, would subdivides into two other categories. The universe, the existing particular manifestation of the universe created itself, which is self-creation, or a different manifestation, a different particular of the genus, the universe created this universe, and so forth. You get infinite regress, right? So these are the three main possibilities, and one of them has two possibilities, right? So Allah Azza wa Jal talks about all three. Obviously, Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us that He exists. That's one possibility. And he's saying that there are two other possibilities. One of them is that you created yourselves, and the other one is that nothing created you, right? So you have three possibilities. He negates the other two by the process of elimination, and he proves himself. What does he negate? He negates أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ, and this is istifham inkariya, right? This is a type of question that basically you're supposed to say no to it. So he negates, basically saying that they did not create themselves. And he's also saying that they were not created from nothing. أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ, right? So he negates those two possibilities. Now you only have the first possibility, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, La ilaha illallah. And this is actually the Quranic articulation of the cosmological argument, but the reason I framed it this way, it's because it becomes much easier to do this algorithmically, or to use AI in particular to prove this. So basically you have La ilaha illallah, there is a necessary cause for the universe. for that, you need to disprove two theorems that they were created from nothing, or they created themselves. And then to prove that they were not created, they did not create themselves, you have to disprove two other possibilities. You have to negate infinite regress, and you have to negate self-creation. And all of those boil down to two fundamental axioms: the law of non-contradiction and at-tarajjuh bila murajjah. Right, at-tarajjuh bila murajjah. And the reason that this becomes useful with AI. So this is how I used it using symbolic AI or rule-based logic in the computers. I did not use any ATPs. What I did, I just went to the functions that mimic our intellect. One of them was the Fibonacci sequence, which basically, if you don't have a base case in such a algorithm, the algorithm will not produce anything because it'll go into infinite regress. So it's incomputable, and that is why what I meant by saying incomputability means impossibility in ahkam hasubiyya. And then a regular recursive algorithm without a base case will prove that self-creation is not possible. And having a function and never calling it proves that at-tarajjuh bila murajjah bahal. Right? So you have, you can actually, you may say, well, how do you know that what the computer is doing is what's happening in reality? I say to you that what the computer is doing is a reflection of the way we were thinking algorithmically. So if you're questioning what the computer is doing, you're questioning the intellect, which becomes a different discussion. It becomes a different discussion, which is not the place for it. But we do know that Allah Azza wa Jal saw value in intellectual or logical proving of his existence, and we know all scholars saw value in logical and rational proving, in proving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a logical and rational way. So I think it'll be the other thing you can claim is that these functions are not representatives of the intellect, but we already agreed, we already have a thesis. We said that anything that can algorithmically be proven on pen and paper can be proven in computers, right? So AI. So there is actually something new that has come up. It's called the HyperTree proof search or HyperTree proof search algorithm. It's a transformer-based and a deep neural network that it's an online network, meaning it's uses reinforcement learning. And the way it solves or proves theorems is that you give it a set of rules. You don't give it examples of theorem proving or other theorems being proven. You give it a set of rules, and you say these are the rules, axioms of the system, and these are the inference rules of the system. Now go ahead and try this problem, right? It tries the problem. It learns from it the first time it tries it based on the feedback mechanism of online learnings and reinforcement learnings. It learns from it, and then it tries another one. So the more algorithms it tries to prove, the more it learns what works and what doesn't work. And another aspect of the HyperTree proof search is that it divides the theorem into subgoals, and those subgoals into other subgoals until it reduces down to axioms or no other subgoals. And it tries to prove all subgoals. If all of them are proven, that means the root theorem is true, right? So it does this on many theorems, and it learns every time it proves it, and then until the time it becomes very good at it. Obviously, it'll never get 100%. It will be hard to get 100%. However, there is a possibility of it coming up with newer, novel proofs for existing algorithms by trying many different combinations. So if we have an AI model that has already been trained itself to a degree that it's reliable, we can actually feed it this argument, because as you can see, we have different subgoals all the way down to axioms. So again, you may be pessimistic and say well, how many other ways can you prove this? But I would argue that there are so many mathematicians who thought there is only 1 or 2 ways to prove an algorithm, but a computer came up with a new one. So again, we shouldn't question the limits of a computer in an absolute sense. So final thoughts. I just want to mention the last thing. Algorithmic theology seeks to make God manifest within algorithms, the heart of computers, which represent the most advanced product of the rational project. By doing so, inshallah, we can begin to address the deeper challenges we face with modern technology. Why? Based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, indeed, in the body, there's a piece of flesh. When it is sound, the whole body becomes sound. And when it goes corrupt, the whole body becomes corrupt. Is it not so that that piece of flesh is the heart? And the heart of computers are algorithms and data structures. If we put God at the center, and this is a metaphysical, a spiritual claim, if we put God in the center, all other aspects of technology, inshallah, will be manageable or will be tameable. Jazakumullah khairan. Yes.
Thank you for the talk.